Funding for this program was provided by the Foundation for Excellence in Louisiana Public Broadcasting. She was born Marjorie Abbey in Webb, Mississippi in 1916, and her penchant for fashion, it seems, was acquired at an early age. After graduating with honors from Mary Baldwin College, she continued her studies at the New York School of Interior Design. In 1940, she began her life in Hammond as the wife of attorney and future Congressman Jimmy Morrison.
Members of Congress from Louisiana were all good friends. And Jimmy Morrison and Marjorie Morrison and my parents, Lindy and Hale Boggs, were great friends, and we all grew up together.
For Marjorie's sons, Benjamin and James, the arts were a big part of growing up in the nation's capital.
I'm a filmmaker now, and I know that has a lot to do with my mother. My brother is he's an avid collector of art and is completely surrounded by it. So, you know, I think that she's definitely had an impact on us.
When the Morrisons returned to Hammond in 1967, the impact of Marjorie's love for the arts soon spread far beyond her children. That year marked the start of an incredible 4-decade term on the Louisiana Council for Music and the Performing Arts. In 1968, she founded the Hammond Arts Council. 2 years later, she began a decade of service on the executive board of the Louisiana State Arts Council. In 1986, she began a 10-year stint on the advisory board of the New Orleans Museum of Art.
When she gets on these, meetings and committees, she's full speed ahead. Let's do this. We can do this. We can make it better. And it's contagious. And I've had so many people, come up to me and say what a remarkable job, your mother has done in getting people motivated to do things. And yeah, she's remarkable in that regard.
She's a great role model, an incredible lobbyist for the arts in Louisiana, and an inspiration for both people of her own generation and for future generations to continue this fight to make Louisiana a great cultural location.
Southern women, and Marjorie Morrison is an exemplar of this, have a charm that is so disarming that they can get pretty much anything done. And her charm and her graciousness made it very easy for her to be effective.
A true measure of her effectiveness was the creation of the Louisiana Art Slides Library, established in response to severe cutbacks in arts funding for schools.
She literally started collecting slides from all over, getting Captain's Industry to donate slide projectors, and she would type up lectures, and literally every school in Louisiana, largely through her efforts and other people also, were able to set up a slide projector and have a teacher go through the slides every week and have an art class.
Marjorie Morrison is just one of those rare individuals that every culture needs, every society needs. I wish there was a Marjorie Morrison at every university in the state, in America. We'd be a better country because of people like her, and we are a better state and a greater community because she exists today.
She has worked so tirelessly to promote art. She believes that art is such an important thing, intrinsically important in everyone's life. And the idea that she can bring that and help focus that and bring that to people has been something that has been basically her life's work. And I think that's the legacy that she leaves behind, and she's done it with such passion.
Marjorie Morrison, lifelong advocate for the arts.
Hello, I'm Beth Courtney. Welcome to Louisiana Legends. This legend was steeped in the fine arts, even as a young child. Her love for all things creative drove her to become an increasing advocate for the arts and for arts education. Her enthusiasm and hard work have benefited Louisianians of all ages, but especially the children. Her philanthropy is boundless in terms of contributions of both time and donations. Marjorie Morrison, welcome to Louisiana Legends.
Thank you so much for having me.
Well, I have always just been in awe of your attachment and devotion to the arts, because sometimes that's a lonely road, isn't it? Has Louisiana been responsive to the arts?
Amazingly so, which has just delighted me really and truly, because I remember when I first was involved with it after we left Washington and came back down here, I had seen the arts in the school in Washington for my children, where they were up there, and came back to Louisiana, and except for a few cities, there was just no art available at all. I mean, the children would grow up and not know anything about all the beautiful art in the world and the museums and everything else. So, I mean, it just started from that I felt they had to have it, because art had always meant so much to me in any fashion on that.
Well, you grew up, though, in a small Mississippi town.
I grew up in a tiny little Mississippi town of 500 people. It certainly had no art there, as a matter of fact. But we traveled every summer, and my mother was always very interested in it. The very first time that we would hit Chicago or New York, anywhere else, we'd go promptly to the museums and go see it. And I was brought up with that whole thing. I mean, she played the piano, so she saw that I had music lessons. She saw that I had dance lessons. I had art lessons as well, as a matter of fact. But none of them really took. But the whole thing was that they gave me a great appreciation for the genius that it takes to really do any of it well. And the rest of my life, I've just enjoyed all of the arts.
Do you feel like now with technology and everything that there is more appreciation, or people can have exposure to it? You can have the whole Louvre on the internet or something, but you have to have it as part of your life, though, don't you?
I think you have to start very young with children, as a matter of fact, to have them appreciated. And I think that's one of our biggest problems. We had a generation before us here in Louisiana that had absolutely no art education at all. And when we first started out, they would say, well, this is just a frill. You don't need that. You need something practical. But you need something more than practical things, as far as I'm concerned, in this world. You need things that make you feel good as well. And there's nothing that I know of that I enjoy more and makes me feel better than seeing lovely art, to see a beautiful dancer, to hear wonderful music. All these things just make you happy. Mm-hmm. And I think we need that as well as practical things in life.
You have had a devotion to this for years and years and years, but of course you've also played, growing up a number of years ago in Mississippi. Girls weren't necessarily, they were supposed to just not have careers or anything, maybe get married or whatever, but you, of course, went to college. You went to Mary Baldwin.
Right, yes, that I did. I mean, no, as a matter of fact, the girls that I knew at that age, they also went to college. It might have been the first generation that ever finished 4 years of college. I must admit the main object always was to get married when it was over with. You did not have careers, that's true. You were housewives and mothers and wives on that business with it. The World War II changed all of that. That's when the women really went to work, when the men were overseas and they went to work. Changed the whole dynamics of the work field as far as that's concerned with it. I remember the first time I had a friend of mine who actually had a job, and I thought, now, why would she do that? You know, so amazing back then. My idea certainly changed thereafter as far as that's concerned. Almost everyone I know has a job of some sort this day and age.
Certainly our daughters, our grandchildren, all that do as well. But expect to.
Right.
But certainly one of the jobs, I know I'm a military brat, and my mother, we grew up, part of her job was assisting my father in his job.
Right.
And of course, when you married Jimmy Morrison, he then ran for Congress, and you spent a lot of time helping him, right?
The strange thing is I knew absolutely nothing about politics when I met Jimmy. The only thing that I knew about politics, was old enough that I could vote a couple of years there. My dad would come in on the day that the election would be, and he would say, we go into the election today, and you vote for so-and-so. That was fine. That was as much as I needed to know. I knew nothing else about it. And then I came down to Louisiana and met Jimmy, and he had already run for state senate and had been defeated. I had not met him at that time. He was a young lawyer, and he was beginning to run for governor as well on it. And it just intrigued me. It was a whole new field, something I knew nothing about whatsoever. And once we did marry, as a matter of fact, and I became really involved in it, you do get just caught up in the whole deal of politics on that. It's one-on-one to know people, amongst other things, and there was never anyone who knew people better than Jimmy did. He never met a stranger. No matter where we would go, it was just amazing. He could make friends with people of all walks of life. He was just incredible with that business. I was a little more reticent to start with on some of that, but of course I backed him up. I was not the speaker in the family. He was. He was a marvelous speaker on that. I would go with him, though, everywhere that he would go when we were campaigning on that. And so I had an opportunity to meet people all over the state since one time he was running, as I say, for governor. He was running for governor when we decided to get married. And it
didn't discourage you.
No, it didn't discourage me. The only thing was we had 2 wedding dates set. The one, if he was elected, at least he was here in the second primary, and if he lost in the first primary, we had another date set. And it turned out he lost in the first primary, and he said, I need to set the date myself. And I said, why? And he said, I don't want to forget it. So he said, February the 14th. That's when we were married.
Valentine's Day.
And he never forgot it, I must admit. He was always very good at remembering anniversaries from then on.
Wonderful. But he was elected to Congress, and for many terms.
Right. Well, I told him he never got elected till he married me. I used to kid him about that. It was true, but I don't know how much I had to do with it, I must admit on that. He was elected for 12 terms, that he was. The Civil Rights Bill was the thing that brought us down on that.
Yeah,
voting. It did.
Well, in all of those campaigns, because for Congress it's a constant campaign.
Oh, absolutely.
Running every 2 years.
Absolutely, that it is.
You look at wives sitting and staring adoringly as their husband gives speech. Did you have to do that too?
Yes.
Was that?
You learn just to sit as if you have never heard the speech before, you've never heard the music before, you've never heard any of it before.
What was it like moving to Washington? Because you moved up there and you had your 2 boys born.
Right.
Lived up there.
Hobby, the older one, Hobson, James Hobson Morrison Jr., was 1 month old to the day when we moved to Washington. I had just gotten up from bed 2 weeks before on that year with it. And I'll never forget our trip up there because we were flying up. We had sent furniture up ahead of time. We had friends of ours there. This was wartime, you must remember. This was 1942. That we had friends of ours that had gotten us an apartment in their building, which was wonderful. They had originally lived in Hammond, so they knew that. And we had sent furniture up and thought it would be there by the time we got there. The flight at that time was a 7-hour flight to Washington. But we had all the arrangements made. So what happened when we got to Atlanta, we found out all the flights were canceled. And here we were with a 1-month-old baby. And fortunately, the nurse I had at home had packed up in a laundry basket, quite frankly, enough diapers and extra stuff in the laundry basket for Hobby to be in, because we thought we'd be on a plane for 7 hours. And instead, we tried to find a way to get back out. But with wartime, almost all the trains were loaded with soldiers, of course, at that time. Jimmy finally got one seat on the train that would go to Washington, an overnight train. And this was sit-up seat, of course. There was no bunk or anything else on that business. But we got on with Hobby in the basket and Jimmy and me, and we'd take turns sitting in the seat all night long on this business with it. I'll never forget, I'll never forget, we had these soldiers in front of us, and Hobby was screaming his head off in the middle of the night. And they say, "Sonny boy, I give you a nickel if you just be quiet." Well, they kept going, and finally got up to $1, and he still wouldn't. Well, of course, the poor child was hungry, amongst other things. It turned out the Chief Justice, Pascal Caligaro, was the soldier in front, and he always remembered meeting me and Hobby on the train.
That is so
Wasn't that amazing?
Interesting. That is amazing.
Right.
When you look back on those Washington years, what are some memories that stand out? Did you go to the Christmas parties at the White House?
I was particularly interested in a congressional club. It was a wonderful club. It was a club for the wives of the congressmen. At that time, we didn't have any women in Congress. They were all men, so they were the wives that were there. They met once a week on Friday afternoon and had a tea. That was the thing you had, usually a speaker or something or other. And it was a lovely way to get a chance to meet all of your congressional wives and be with them.
When did you first know Lindy?
Oh, I knew Lindy from here before I even went to Washington, because Jimmy had been in Tulane when Lindy and Hale Boggs were in, at Tulane and at Newcomb. They'd been friends forever and a day. As a matter of fact, they used to call them kissing cousins on that business, because Lindy's cousin was Jimmy's roommate. He was a Morrison as well, though they were really not related to Jimmy, but we always called them, said they were. Knew Jimmy Morrison. So we had been very good friends even before we went up there. And the first term that we went there, Hale had been in the term before we went, but he was defeated, and he went into the Navy. And Lindy single-handedly saw that he was elected and brought him back the next term after that business. But my first 2 years we were there, they were not in Washington. Then they came back from then on the rest of the time, of course, that we were there with that. So we saw them constantly.
Was there a sense of people from Louisiana getting together and feeling a certain unity? Or
Well, when I first went up there, no, as a matter of fact, because Jimmy was out as far as the establishment was concerned, and they really didn't think he should have been there, you see.
I see.
So they were a little cool to me to begin with. The ones that were mainly very nice to me were the ones that I knew from my Mississippi home on that business.
I see.
Jamie Whitten was the congressman, and I had even dated Jamie before I even knew Jimmy on that business with it, but he'd later become congressman who was our district in Mississippi. Senator Eastland was our senator from Mississippi. They went out of their way to be nice to me, the ones that, as I say, from Tennessee and Mississippi, more so than the Louisiana ones. It took a little time for the Louisiana group to sort of realize we were going to be there for a while.
So from World War II really through turbulent times in the civil rights period.
Oh,
and,
absolutely.
And you said the Voting Rights Act. That was a courageous vote.
It was. Well, Jimmy was, I guess the deciding vote in that. As a matter of fact, there were only two from the South that voted for that bill. And his was the deciding vote on that. We were always very proud of that, I must admit. We knew there was a possibility that it might defeat us. We hope not, of course, as far as that's concerned.
Right.
But it was just a shame that things had gotten so polarized on the civil rights bill. It really was on that. I mean, to me, I had been brought up with I had been told to call them colored people all of my life. I must admit, African American now seems to be the term one uses on it. But anyway, colored was it. And Cookie, who had been with Mother and Father ever since they had married and died on the place, as a matter of fact. After I had married, years later on that, she had been like a second mother to me. She was just wonderful. She really was. And I was the last of the children. Mother had my sister was 8 years older than my brother. My brother was 8 years older than I was. I was the baby of the family. By then, they'd gotten sort of tired of taking care of children, I think, on that. And I was turned over pretty much to Cookie on that. And we would go, she would take me across the bayou. We lived right on the bayou there at our house. And she'd take me across the bayou to Aunt Sophronia's school, which was the colored school that they had. And this was when I was 3 or 4 years old that we would go over there at Aunt Sophronia's. And I realized years later, I did not at the time because it just was, it was just what happened. It was a one-room schoolhouse. Those children came all the way from, 5 to 16 or 18 years old on that. They were only in school 4 months out of the year, and she was the teacher of it. And we'd go just before school would be out in the afternoon, and then go to Aunt Sophronia's house and get biscuits and molasses and buttermilk, which I loved. I thought this was fine. And it wasn't until, as I say, years later that I thought, how dreadful what we have done to all these people all these years. We haven't given them an education. We haven't given them anything. How do you expect them to do anything if they have no education? So when the bill came up, I mean, there was no question with either one of us as far as that's concerned, because Jimmy had always had wonderful colored friends, too, all of his life. Been brought up with people, that had been with the family for years and years and years.
So he discussed this vote with you. You all had lots of conversations about it.
Oh, absolutely. That we did, and there was just no question as far as I was concerned with it. I mean, it's just one of those things you needed to be done, and praise be it was.
Praise be. Well, and absolutely. And so then, though, but he came back home, and then you had a very energetic gentleman around all the time. And did you put him to work?
A very short time I had him all the time. He thought he could retire, but he found out after about 3 or 4 months this was not for me. But he'd always had his law office there, as a matter of fact. He was an attorney to begin with on that. So he reopened his office on that. He only took a few cases that he was interested in, but at least he had a secretary who would take care of him during the day, and he would get out of the house, I must say, which is one of the things for those of you who have retired husbands, you need to have a place to go somewhere else on that visit. So that worked out fine with him. Just enough to keep him interested and busy and such as that. And it gave me time to do whatever I wished to do as far as that.
And then you really decided big time into the arts.
That I did.
Passion and love.
That I did.
And you and some colleagues decided you were going to have art slides. Tell us about that project.
That was Lucille Bloom's idea on that to start with. She came up and I took her to see an exhibition at the National Gallery. And when we were ready to leave, she said, wouldn't it be wonderful if we could just bring something like this to Louisiana? And I said, definitely so, but there's just no way. The New Orleans Museum was not then quite as famous as it is today, and had not done as much as then as it has since then. So she said, well, see what you can do. So I went, after she left, I went back to the gallery and discovered that they had an educational service, which I did not know. I had not heard anything about it at all. And they had some 12 lectures, the slides with lectures that went with them, that were available on loan as a lending library. And I asked them, I said, well, could we possibly take them to Louisiana and have them? And they said, well, yes, but you'd bring them back and forth. And I said, no, what I'd like to do is have them permanently, if we could, and then we can, let you know how many we use through the year and so forth. So we started from that. Bill Dodd was then the superintendent of education on that, and Bill Dodd had run as lieutenant governor on Jimmy's ticket when Jimmy ran for governor, so we knew him very well. So when I broached the subject to him, and I said, if we could bring these things, and would you house them and send them out to the schools if they would like to have them? And he agreed, and that was really the way it worked from then on out. Each superintendent was very kind about doing the same thing. They housed the slides, and they would send them out. I wrote the catalogs. It was eventually, of course, we ended up with 100,000 slides before it got through, all the way from prehistoric times, cave paintings, all the way to the most contemporary art and sculpture that we had. And we had them in slide folders. And then with a printed lecture that would go with it. Well, of course, eventually you got the tapes that went with it, but you still had the slides. Of course, now you've got all this, all
technology.
Technology has changed it all.
It has.
But for 25 years, that's what I did. I would purchase the slides. We would purchase. The LCMPA would help put up some of the funding for it, and we'd get donations for it. And people that would travel would bring back slides from the museums and that sort of thing.
Do you think it's still tenuous in Louisiana, though? It's always been interesting to me that we have such a rich culture here. We have wonderful writers and musicians and artists, and yet it seems that we're always hesitant about having this as formal instruction. Does this?
The thing is, Beth, I think the whole problem with that is that we had a whole generation before us that had no art education at all. And when you started going into the schools, which we did, and we started there in Hammond, I started the Arts Council there, one of the branches of LCMPA in Hammond, and we would take the art slides in, asked to take them into them in schools, and they said, these are just a frill. You don't need that. You need practical knowledge of things. Well, you need more than practical knowledge of things. That's wonderful, I must admit. I have no question about that. But you also need something a little bit more on that deal, I think, that brings joy in your life. I was so proud that actually this last election in Hammond, they finally voted to put art and music in every school in Tangipahoa Parish. And I was so thrilled I did not know what to do. But we've been working on that for 40 years.
Well, I know that at Southeastern, the university in Hammond, that you have been so involved with. They decided for a period of time not to have football, but to have fanfare, a sort of celebration of the arts, and I know you were involved with that.
Right. We have the orchestras come in. We have New Orleans Orchestra and Baton Rouge Symphony Orchestra that comes in. We have playwrights that come in. We had Ed Albee was there for one time, and some others that we've had. We've just had a fabulous deal, and for one solid month, it is just the whole city has turned over to it. You have art exhibitions, you have lectures. It's just a terrific deal.
You have a fabulous garden.
Oh.
and great green thumb. I managed to kill pretty much all plants that are in my yard. And you have a beautiful, it's Shadow Creek?
Shadow Creek, that's right.
Well, tell me about that.
Well,
Azaleas abound?
Jimmy and I, all my life, I had really wanted to live in the country. I had lived in this little town. All of my friends lived on the plantation. But Dad had a plantation on both sides of the town. As a matter of fact, he had two on one side and one on the other side of the town. So he lived, and he was also the president of the bank. And we had the gin that was also in this little town of Webb. So we lived in Webb. We had some 7 acres, I must admit. So we had a large place there. I love flowers. I mean, I've always loved flowers. And it's such a complete change from where I lived in the Mississippi Delta to what down here on this business. I mean, these azaleas and camellias, we don't have all of those up there. I didn't have, as a matter of fact, on that. We didn't have pine trees either where I came from on that. So we had all of this on that. Well, we cleared out a little place around the house and started working with that. And we started with 50 azaleas, 50 camellias, and 50 sasanquas, I well remember.
Right.
And it grew and grew. We moved the fence 3 times because we did fence with the cattle around to start with, because they finally got the cattle law on that. But anyway, we moved it and kept planting more and more.
I bet springtime is gorgeous.
It is, but I must say Katrina did the most devastation of anything. We'd had other storms before, they'd done some, but we lost just between the 2 houses, because later we built the pool house over there from where I'm now living now on that, and it was a guest house then. But we lost 102 trees, huge pine trees. They had not been cut for 25 years when we moved out there. So then we've been there, you know, as I say, since 1950 we've been in there. All of those times, these huge pine trees went down. They took down parts of the camellias and sasanqua beds and the azalea beds and everything around there.
Before I let you go, I can imagine you out in your garden, but that's hard to imagine with you in your high heels, because
Right.
one of the things about you that we all know is that you are always beautifully dressed. And how I can't wear high heels anymore. How do you do that?
I was so thrilled to be able to put on a pair of high heels when I got to be 13. I was the youngest one of all of my friends on that. I always was on that. They had had high heels a year before Mother said I could have my high heels. Once I put them on at 13, I never took them off. I just loved them. I absolutely loved them. That I do. And I used to be kidded. As a matter of fact, somebody came out one time, and I was working in one of the azalea beds, or camellia beds, I think, grafting camellias or something or other, and they found me in high heels and white gloves. Well, the high heels I always wore, the white gloves, but old white gloves. Old white gloves. There was a good use for them, though, in the garden.
Well, certainly you are somebody we admire for many things, for all of your good work you've done in the community and sharing your love of art. And,
I loved it.
And we are so pleased to honor you as a legend this year, and thank you for sitting and sharing some stories with me.
I'm just delighted. I thank you no end, and to be the legend is just beyond anything I could ever have thought of. Right. But I thank you so much for doing it.
Well, and thank you all for joining us for this edition of Louisiana Legends.
For a copy of this program, call 1-800-973-7246 or go online to www.lpb.org. Funding for this program was provided by the Foundation for Excellence in Louisiana Public Broadcasting.